Greetings, my name's Guy Dauncey, and this is the show Change the World, where we are stubborn and determined optimists that we can make a difference in the world, that we can build a better world, whether it's with relation to the climate crisis, the housing crisis, or today, the forests. And my guest is Icel Dobell, who's been a champion for the forests in North Cowichan for several years. She lives in a beautiful, beautiful home on Maple Mountain. And Icel, welcome to the show. Why are the forests of North Cowichan different from the other forests all up and down the east coast of the island? What makes them a community forest?
Well, community forests, we're unique because our community actually owns these 6 mountains of forest, which is not only unique to Vancouver Island, but also to the continent. There is no place on the continent where a community has such a resource, such ecosystems that they own, can manage, can decide what they're going to do with.
So you mentioned two things there. Number one, 6 mountains. And then the second, I want to know, well, first of all, what are the 6 mountains and why do you call it that?
Well, there are 6 mountains around the Cowichan Valley. And we call them the 6 mountains because they're technically called the Municipal Forest Reserve, which implies that they're meant to be logged, which is not now necessarily the case. We're actually in a public consultation about the future and the fate of these forests that we get to decide on as a community.
So for the sake of our viewers, tell us what the 6 mountains are, their names, so we can actually begin to place them out.
I live on Stony Hill. There's Zuhalem,
right,
Richards, Sicker, Maple Mountain, Provost.
So if you're driving up or down the highway, you're going to be passing, if you're heading north, you're going to have Provost and what's the other one on the left?
On your left, you have Provost and Sicker.
And if you ever go to Cowichan Bay, you'll see Zuhalem towering above you across the water, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so how did they come to be in community ownership?
Back in the 30s and 40s, the people didn't pay their taxes on the land, and they reverted to the municipality. And then in 46, they created a forest reserve. And then in the 80s, they created a forest advisory committee and hired a forest manager and started to log again.
So to get me square on this, in the 1930s, there was logging happening all up and down the island. So the loggers who cleared those 6 mountains took the timber and then took off without paying the taxes.
Well, it's a little more complicated. The valleys on the island were logged first. And actually the mountains, the higher and more difficult areas to get, were actually logged in the 50s. This is really critical because what it means is on the valley side of the mountains, they are now at least 70 years old. So they are now naturally regenerated. They were not tree plantations at the time. The tree plantations came later after the 50s. So yeah, these are naturally regenerated second growth forests.
So I know that you've been through a process of community consultation to ask what should the future of these forests be, because you and your friends raised quite the ruckus when you discovered that clear cutting was coming over the mountains, and you wanted to say, hey, no, wait a minute, let's stop and think. So at this point, you've made 4 beautiful videos, and we're going to show the 4th of these videos. It's a 7-minute clip. Stay with you. I guarantee you'll love every second of it. And then we'll come back and continue talking when we've all watched this beautiful video.
In the shadow of the old growth, in an island within an island, in a forest within a forest, is a voice. It is the voice of the 6 mountain forest, and of every forest, the voice of the ancient rainforests, the remains of the living and dead, and the voice of their offspring forests, descendants of a primordial unfolding, on their way to becoming, already functioning, as old growth. Welcome to beautiful British Columbia's second growth, naturally regenerated forests. Logged 70 to 250 years ago, an immensity of ecosystems, recovering, returning, some of the most traveled, most revered, yet most misunderstood forests in the province. Welcome to our lifelines. As in the War of the Woods in the 80s, when there was still time to protect the vastness of ancient forests, so today it is possible to protect those logged before the arising of the tree plantations and the machines, logged before the supplanting of 34 fellers by one feller buncher, and the hoe-chuckers crashing through, logged back in the day when things went slow, and a multitude of trees were left standing. For in the beginning, not every conifer was taken, not the small, nor bent, nor broken, nor all species, nor the deciduous, not the nitrogen-fixing alder, aspen, birch, nor the soil-enriching maple, nor the mysterious contorted oak, arbutus, dogwood, and left standing with the living were the dead, the decaying insect-rich bird, bat, native squirrel meal habitat trees, and on the ground nurse logs and tree trunks crowned with verdant life, and the living stumps, the leprechaun living stumps, with no chemicals, no herbicides, just the earth, just the gently trodden, uncrushed soil, seeds, roots, mycelium, mosses, lichens, and the infinite, invisible, infinitesimal soil builders. In short, everything. The stuff, the triad building blocks of nature. Energy plus matter plus information. The essential ingredients of an ecosystem left to its own intelligence to heal, to begin again. So it was possible. So it happened, in a time of temperate and favorable conditions, that these forests grew and grew and grew back. Behold today, before your eyes, these remarkable forests. Feast with your eyes, if you live near, or if you cannot travel here, behold through the eyes of children. Behold these ecosystems of 10,000 years evolution, of diversity, complexity, harmony, home to a multitude of species, from the tangible to the invisible, from worm meal to the ethereal, from the generative, regenerative reclamation of the earth, the root-bound fertility of the uneroded, unfathomable underground, to the green vaulted firmament. Behold these backbones of the coastal and interior communities, guardians of water, soil, air, sanctuaries beloved to islanders, mainlanders, people from across the continent and beyond the seas, from the rugged northern coast to the warm lands of the south, the Gulf Islands, the Mediterranean of the Pacific Northwest. And know that at the present rate of clear-cutting, these ecosystems, these emerald and azure jewels bartered by the crown, could be gone in the blink of an eye, or, contrariwise, if protected, if left to continue to grow, are on the brink of becoming the next fastness of old growth. For decades, small groups have warned their communities of things happening on the backsides of the mountains, out of sight, behind locked gates and private signs, spreading, climbing, approaching. And yet, despite hundreds of thousands of people arriving within these towering forests to hike, to bike, to breathe, to bathe and connect within the depths and currents of the surging, soaring canopy, to sleep, to dream, to awaken in the silence and song-drenched understory, despite the visual, visceral consequence of clear-cutting, the erosion, the eruption of non-native, toxic, flammable, yellow warning species traveling down logging roads, country roads, highways, spilling through tree plantations into the growing lands and waterways, despite the contrast with tree plantations. Single species in rows of uniformity, fast-growing trees, matchstick trees, incendiary, exposed, without bark-thick elders to shelter, ground, anchor, nurture, barely embarked, mowed down every few years. And despite the lessons of the old growth, no longer hidden, the last freighter-filling truckloads headed for distant ports. Cloaked in secrecy, the story of the next generation of old growth is a mystery to most people who would protect these forests if they knew how, if they could do so right now, if they cease to believe we have no voice in the system. For we do. In September 2018, in a valley, a voice warned of clear-cutting coming over the tops of 6 mountains. Thousands of citizens heard the warning. It ignited a grassroots forest campaign that led to a public consultation about the highest good of the North Cowichan Community Forests, Mount Zuhalem, Provost Swacus, Stony Hill, Maple, Richards, Sicker. Throughout the province, small groups are watching, For should one community end the clear-cutting in its backyard, and should the story spread and grow, should the individual and collective ear hear, and the personal and public eye see for itself the facts, the truth about the forests, then profound change is possible now. For true change in the world is simple. It does not require every person. It does not require revolution. It is not noisy. It begins not on the outside, but like a forest, quietly, deeply, within.
So, Icel, that video shows me two things. It shows me the beauty of the forest in its growing state as it's beginning to recover its old growth characteristics, and the strength of community of people who love to be in the forest, the children, the learning, the species. That it's far more than a bunch of 2x4s, growing ready for harvesting, right? So we're coming to this critical phase, I understand, of public consultation as to what should be happening with the forest. So fill us in on what the story is around the public consultation.
Okay, well, first of all, there was the UBC, the University of British Columbia's forestry faculty team, has been leading the way. And in October last year, we had a public consultation, and the majority of people came out in favor of conservation versus logging. So UBC took this information away and came back just a little while ago with 4 forest options for management of the forests. And so now in December and into January, we will be taking part in surveys and meetings, Zoom meetings, one public meeting, to express what it is the community wants to happen on these forests.
And am I right that within the North Cowichan people, there's surveying and opinion polling and questions happening? So the 4 options, number 1 is status quo, like carry on logging. The second option is do so, but just a bit less, right? Reduced harvest. The third option is active conservation. And the fourth is passive conservation, which I presume means leave it all alone, don't do anything at all.
Right.
Which is what's the within where do we stand, the nonprofit that you are involved in, or the organization, what are you recommending is the best option for these forests?
For us, there is only one option, and that is active conservation for many, many reasons.
I know that you love this forest, so you've got a pretty good handle on it.
So status quo, just to be clear, it leaves 15% of the forest, and reduced harvest leaves 35%. So we're talking about the valley sides, first of all. There's 5,000 hectares in total. So divide that, 2,500 on the valley side. And so it will take about 30 years the backsides are completely logged, overlogged. There's no more logging to be done. UBC has come in forward and said, there's nothing, all you can log now are the valley sides. So this is through our trails. They're through the watersheds. They're, just above our growing lands. So the effect of logging these forests, imagine, most people know in British Columbia about the flooding that happens after you log mountains or forests on mountains. So, these are the backbones of our community.
Yeah. So the tragedy of it is, as I understand it, right now, most of the timber that's being logged, and everyone sees the timber trucks going up and down the island, is being shipped off overseas as raw logs.
Most of it, yeah.
It's not as if it's feeding the Crofton Mill or it's feeding jobs for people. And even the idea that logging is not people with chainsaws, it's a great big fella buncher machine.
Absolutely.
Right?
And hoe chuckers.
And conversely, we need to store carbon in the forest. The forest can not only mitigate the climate crisis by cooling the temperature and protecting the species and the trees, but they actually store carbon. What has the UBC study got to say about storing carbon?
So this is really exciting, interesting, and complex. Carbon credits have got a bad name because people assume that you have to sell to major corporations, Shell, Chevron, Coca-Cola. It's not true. So you can sell to local businesses, municipal governments. The thing about carbon credits is they will pay for conservation. They will pay for protecting. They are not an end. They are a means of stopping the logging for now. So because of the carbon credits, how much money they can make, the passive conservation is $8 million more in 30 years than status quo as revenue, and $4 million for active conservation.
Carbon credits are quite a complex thing to wrap your mind around, but basically, people or organizations will be paying North Cowichan for not logging, for the merits of keeping the trees standing where they can be of benefit to the world and the planet.
Exactly.
Right?
And ostensibly it's a pollution tax. We're all part of pollution. So, it encourages companies to become more environmentally correct. But in the meanwhile, we just like bottles, returning plastic bottles, etc. It's a tax.
So let me change tack a little bit here and talk. You personally have a very deep affinity with the forest. Apart from the fact that you've lived there all your life, tell me what the forest means to you personally.
Oh, they are everything. I lived in the city. I was born here, but I've always needed to be in nature, always, and mostly the forest. Even in Vancouver, I went to the forest every day. So to live in the forest is just to be surrounded by family as much as my own flesh and blood family. I live in an area that's quite remote, so I've actually on a point. So I get to live with a certain number of species on a regular basis, so we actually know each other. They are truly my family, from the eagles down to the chickadees. And I've discovered through, my interest has grown and grown. And so I've discovered that chickadees require a certain amount of habitat, just like eagles. We think of habitat of these massive creatures who need habitat. It's true of absolutely all species. So, walking through these forests, one becomes aware of how many species. There are 141 species at risk just in this area. At risk because they require habitat, and we are destroying habitat. In North Cowichan, like everywhere on the island, thousands and thousands of people are moving here. And so we keep encroaching on more and more habitat. So these forests that are functioning as old growth they're not just backdrops. They're not just our views. Yes, they're pretty views. And yes, they're wonderful to walk in and they're great. We have people coming from all over the world for our famous biking trails and hiking trails. And that's great. But, with climate change and looking what future generations may face if there are no ecosystems left, these forests, I see them as the lifeline for my grandchildren. Nature will be fine. It's heartbreaking to see species become extinct, but our species will not survive without ecosystems.
Yeah. So thinking selfishly, my wife was up in Whistler recently, in not for skiing and in what's called the shoulder season, and the town was packed with cyclists and with hikers. Cyclists and hikers. There's such a hunger for people to experience nature and forests and wilderness and get back to that. And North Cowichan is so accessible. These mountains are so accessible. If there could be, I've lived here in this region on the island for 30 years, but in this region for maybe 8 years. And there's still so many trails I've yet to discover that are not even marked on those mountains. If there was a really rich public trail system, but if you go with the active conservation, that's number 3 of the 4 options, does that allow any logging at all?
Well, it's very complex. UBC has said all 4 scenarios are broad strokes. We will work out the details later. So what UBC has said is that in this scenario, there would be thinning, and they don't go into detail. But what has happened, as I've said, the backsides of the mountains have all been logged over and over. So, and there are a few places, not so many, in sort of areas people don't see on the valley side. And in the wake of the logging have come enormous amounts of invasive species. And in the tree plantations, there is a need in many places for thinning. We have wiped out, we haven't wiped out, there's a need to restore what they call our woodlands, and what they actually are Quechan spiritual areas where, like the oak groves, where they had camas bulbs, and they were areas where there's medicines, important medicines, not just for the Quechan people, but for all people. The Quechan have the knowledge that we need to learn.
So when you say the Quechan, that is in English settler speaking, the Cowichan.
There are
right?
5 tribes, and when this, when people arrived from Europe, they divided these tribes, these people, the Quechan, that's the name of the 5 tribes, into 5 tribes. But it's not true. It was, and so now they call themselves the Quechan. They don't call themselves the Quechan nations, just the Quechan.
And have you had discussions with them around the future of the forest?
Yes, with the Quechan are like all people. They are made up, like all of us, they are made up of many people. Some people would like to log. Some people are very concerned with the spiritually, culturally important areas. So I tend to, of course, gravitate to the people who love the forest as ecosystem. The Quechan people. Well, you can see in our videos, the 3 of them. After the first video that was shown at the first council meeting that started the campaign, was an extraordinary person, Queholt, who's in the next 3 videos and who inspired them, and is just one of the most extraordinary people I have ever had the fortune to know.
Yeah.
So we've had many, many conversations about all people coming together on these on these forests, through these forests.
I would have thought that compared to clear cutting with a fella buncher machine, going in and thinning the forest so as to be able to accelerate the restoration of old growth characteristics would create more jobs than a man sitting in a fella buncher just taking out cut, zoom, cut, zoom, cut, zoom, and shit.
Absolutely. Right? There's, and not only that, restoration, the Quechan are doing all of the removal of invasive species on the mountains. It's an enormous job, and we have not even begun. If with all this money that could come in through carbon credits, there is so much work. It's indescribable, all the jobs that could be, especially if we have vision and we created, if it became a conservation center, a college of conservation, people came from all over and to study, to learn.
So you're floating the idea that the whole Six Mountains area could be a college of conservation where you could simultaneously learn about nature, learn about the species, learn about ecological forestry, learn about old growth, learn about species protection, learn about indigenous cultures, traditional ways. That's a powerful idea.
I actually get teary when you say it. It's so obvious. We make more money not logging. We have more jobs not logging. We protect our watersheds. For people who don't know what a watershed is, sometimes forest industry will talk about, where we protect, we leave a few trees around the rivers or lakes. A watershed is not a river or a lake. It is the whole forest is a watershed. The forest suck in the water. Get me started.
There's a tragic watershed story that happens every flood season when the rain's pouring down. If you go to Cowichan Bay soon after really heavy rainfalls, you'll see that the water of the ocean is brown, thick with mud. And it's coming down, not down the Cowichan River, but down the Coxsilo River, because the clear cutting on the slopes has allowed the soil to be washed off and washed into the river. And the sea lions flee, the boaters flee, everyone goes because the ocean is brown and it's soil that's accumulated over 12,000 years. So protecting soil in the watersheds is really important.
It's not just Cowichan Bay, it's everywhere. It's Maple Bay, it's everywhere where there has been logging. There is, the lake, we have a marsh that there's flooding that happens there, and sediment is,
So on the ocean side of things, that mud pollution would really affect the herring spawning season in February, probably.
Absolutely. And starting the Salmonous March, it could start in October, not this year because of this incredible heat wave we've had.
So the public has got this period of consultation coming up in North Cowichan when they can think about it and decide. And where can the public learn more information, first of all?
Well, of course, I'm going to plug our website, and for good reason. I didn't make it. Robert Fullerton has put together this incredible, there's nothing like it on the municipality. He has put 4 years into creating it, keeping it up to date with every single thing you could possibly need to know about the forest if you're really interested. It's wheredowestand.ca. So, and there's also a wonderful resource. There's 3 resources. There's a retired journalist here, Larry Pinn, with sixmountains.ca. Incredible resource.
Okay. Discourse
has put out a little bit, or really impressive articles, but once in a while. And the Citizen, of course, the municipal website is there too.
We take the world we live in for granted a lot. You grow up in the valley, you see the trees, you see the roads, blah, 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 you see it normal. But to realize that we're on the edge of a change that could, impact the next 100 to 300 years of people living in the whole Cowichan Valley, and North Cowichan in particular, in the way these forests are managed. It's such a unique situation to have municipal ownership. Because where I live, it's all private land ownership, and any one private landowner can come out and cut down as many trees as they want without really asking permission from anyone, unless it's right in a riparian zone. But the fact that the community, through the council, owns and manages this forest is a very unusual situation, and huge opportunity if I look at it that way, right?
Well, can't remember if I said yet, but that it is the only community forest like it, and there's nothing comparable on the continent. And back in 2019, when you first interviewed us, thank you, and actually you presented it, we had a meeting where in 2 weeks, 700 people showed up in our community, which shows you the enthusiasm and interest. But at that time, forest advocates like yourself, Andy McKinnon, Jens Wieting, all sorts of people came and spoke to us all. And we learned that like the forests, we're all connected. So too, all these communities that, very few people know about, even in your neighborhood, up and down the island, realize that these second growth forests are coming down. It's been all in the back hills. Now people are beginning to wake up. And even if they are private owned by Mosaic, we still have a right. They belong, the First Nations notion that we do not own the earth. So if these are the last, as everybody knows now, the old growth, there's about 2.5% left. So those are the last remaining ecosystems that, are old.
But this is the future old growth. If we can protect the second growth, it will become
It's already functioning as old growth.
It means that our children and our grandchildren, their grandchildren, will be able to know and live in and experience an old growth forest all around them, and be affected in their souls by that, while generating jobs through the care and maintenance of those.
Well, the extraordinary thing is when you even imagine logging, even if it didn't make $4 million to do active conservation, even if there wasn't a College of Conservation, et cetera. Think about it, in 30 years, say they made exactly the same amount of revenue, the logging and the conservation. Yeah. Well, in 30 years, logging the valley side of the mountains, you will have 0 to brand new to 30-year-old tree plantations, as opposed to 6 mountains of 100-year-old trees. 100-year-old trees are big.
So time has run out on us, so we need to wrap up now. Is there a final quick thought you want to leave our viewers with, Icel?
Well, I do hope that speaking to North Cowichan, people will go to wheredowestand.ca and wherever they choose, and will notice that the first public meeting begins November 28th. There'll be surveys and 2 Zoom meetings throughout December into January. So I hope people will, just be interested.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Icel, and thank you for all the work you've done on this. And thanks to all our viewers. My name is Guy Dauncey. My guest was Icel Dobell, and we'll talk more next time. Take care. Bye-bye.